Good morning, as I said, good afternoon to the East Coast folks. I am Nancy Keach, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this episode of Zoom In on Dementia and Alzheimer's, which is brought to you courtesy of the Bright Focus Foundation. Bright Focus Foundation is a 51-year-old nonprofit that has funded over $300 million in scientific research worldwide for Alzheimer's disease, macular degeneration, and glaucoma. And we are delighted for you to join us today. We also want to thank Biogen, Lilly and Genentech for making this possible by giving educational funds to support this program. So thanks for all that. Usually, we've been doing this show for almost 2 years now, and usually we have a very specific topic, like hereditary genes, or how do I get a diagnosis, and today is a little broader, and we got 140 questions, so bear with me. We have one of the greatest talents in the field with us today, and so we're going to cover a lot of ground. All of the previous episodes are available for free online. So if we don't get to your question today, because I think, as I said, there were 140 questions, you'll probably can find the answer to your question in one of these episodes. So if you go to brightfocus.org/zoom in, you can see if you have questions about early onset, if you have questions about genetics or specific drugs, the Kisunla, Leqembi, please go to those episodes. As I said, if we're not covered today, I'm going to now jump right in to introducing Dr. Tanzi. And I think we could take the slide down. There we go. Oh, it's so great to see everybody. So as the pioneering director of the Genetics and Aging Research and director of the McCants Center for Brain Health at Massachusetts General Hospital, Dr. Tanzi is a leading expert, I wrote, on everything related, not everything in the world, but everything related to cognitive dysfunction and the genes that affect it. And he is an influential voice on cognitive health and healthspan, which we'll talk about a little bit today. As the Kennedy Professor of Neurology at Harvard, his research continues to drive significant advancements in understanding, preventing, and treating Alzheimer's and related dementias. Dr. Tanzi, also of note, uses AI in his lab to develop new theories on early interventions. A true rock star of science, he's author of the New York Times bestsellers like Superbrain. He's just about to start writing a new book, which will come out, I believe, in about a year. Is that right?
Yeah, we take about a year to write it, and then
a year to write it, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And in his spare time, he cuts albums with Aerosmith. So he is a wonderful, wonderful and generous person with information in the field. So I'm going to start you off. Dr. Tanzi, thank you so much for doing this and welcome.
Oh, thanks. Glad to be here. Thank you.
So I'm going to kick off with this question. You talk often about how early detection is critical to develop and provide safe and affordable treatments for Alzheimer's disease. We've had 2 episodes that we've already done, one with Randy and one with Dave, on how to get memory screenings and how to get a diagnosis, although I guarantee you it still is incredibly complicated and difficult for real people to actually walk this path and get a proper diagnosis, and where do you go first, and there's no neurologists, and you wait 9 months, and all of those things. But I want to start with a question from Mike Zindel, who has Alzheimer's. He's an Alzheimer's advocate, and he participated in the Aduhelm trial for 3 years, and he has basically eliminated most of the amyloid in his brain, and he's become a very vocal advocate. And he asks, what do you think is the impact of how the stigma surrounding Alzheimer's pertains to early detection? So how does the stigma around Alzheimer's affect this need for all of us, for us to inform both doctors and the public that early detection is critical?
This is probably one of the most important questions right now, because now that we have blood tests from, Randy Bateman and Dave Holzman's company, C2N, blood tests that can tell you if you have amyloid plaque in your brain. It can tell you if you're starting to make the neurofibrillary tangles in your brain. And keeping in mind that this disease begins, we don't diagnose the disease until you show clinical symptoms of cognitive impairment. By that time, you've already had the biology, the pathobiology in your brain for anywhere from 1 to 3 decades. So it's kind of like the way we treat Alzheimer's is, in contrast to cancer or heart disease, is we wait until the brain has already, degenerated quite a bit before we even diagnose it, because that's when you show symptoms. It's almost like we're not going to diagnose heart disease until you are starting to have congestive heart failure. So just like with heart disease, I like the analogy, once you have congestive heart failure and you need a bypass, simply lowering cholesterol isn't going to be enough. But if you were managing your cholesterol and you knew you had to a decade or 2 or 3 before you got actual symptoms of heart disease, you could avoid it. Amyloid is to Alzheimer's as cholesterol is to heart disease. And a lot of the controversy around amyloid is that if you treat amyloid when a patient's diagnosed, it's like only treating cholesterol when you have late-stage heart disease. You had to do that as early prevention. So how do we do that? How do we do early detection? Now we can with a blood test. And early prevention, in which case a person doesn't want to be told or tell the world, I have Alzheimer's disease. Because when you say I have Alzheimer's disease, the clinical diagnosis is, oh, you already have cognitive impairment. Are you going to have trouble doing your job? You can be working in a job for 10, 20, 30 years with Alzheimer's disease, pathology brewing in your brain, and you're not going to show symptoms till later. So there is a stigma. So I almost think we need another term. Sometimes I use the term biological Alzheimer's, right? Meaning that the pathology has begun, but you may be decades away from any cognitive impairment at all. But this is when you have to treat, right? We don't wait till you have a huge tumor to treat cancer. We treat you when you start when you have a rogue cell. I started cholesterol meds, with a family history of heart disease in my 20s, right? And so I'm the first Tanzi in my immediate family who lived past 45 years old because of the genetics. So you have to be proactive and know what you need to do, detect early, predict early, and then intervene early. But if doing that says you have Alzheimer's and that's a stigma, it's a big problem. So it's a really big, important question. I don't know what we call it, but or just teach the world that you can have biological Alzheimer's and prevent the clinical symptoms later on by treating early on. Maybe we give it a different name. I don't know.
Yep. And so just to clarify that, so we're saying that amyloid starts to build up in the brain 10 to 30 years before symptoms come on. And yet we're asking people to try to get tested and get that amyloid, which is a biomarker, like you said, like cholesterol is for, and test for the amyloid 10 to 30 years before you're going to have any symptoms.
Well,
So,
let me ask you, the amyloid is the cause,
right.
but there are biomarkers to tell you have amyloid in your brain based on a blood test. And that's so, knowing that, and then we can get into whether we have drugs that are good enough and cheap enough and safe enough to make it actionable, which is a whole nother, thing we need to address.
Yeah, and we'll get to some of that. But I have Donna from Rhode Island wrote, what is your risk for developing Alzheimer's if you have no symptoms but are positive for amyloid and tau on a PET scan? So you have the biomarkers, you have no symptoms.
Yeah.
There's a stigma to go in and find out.
Yeah. Well,
what's your risk?
okay. So Donna, I'm from Rhode Island originally, so that's a nice question for me. So once you have plaques and tangles, I like to put it this way. Amyloid is like the match, and it lights brush fires that it tangles. And the tangles propagate and spread like brush fires. And if you only have plaques and tangles, and you don't get the wildfire, which is neuroinflammation, the inflammation in the brain, you won't get the disease, basically. So we notice because we study what are called resilient brains, where you have people who die in their 80s, let's say, cognitively perfectly fine. And then to the surprise of the pathologist, you see tons of plaques and tangles in the brain. You say, how did this person not have Alzheimer's? In every single case, it's because their glial cells in the brain stayed chilled out and didn't become inflammatory. There was no neuroinflammation. It stopped at the brush fires. You never got the wildfire. So it is possible, theoretically, to have plaques and tangles and not get to the neuroinflammation wildfire that gives you the disease, but it's rare. So the sad fact is if there's already plaques and tangles, you have biological Alzheimer's. How long it's going to be before you have symptoms is now going to be a function of your genetics. Most of the known, I found the first genes together with others like John Hardy, who had on the show back in the 80s and 90s, the amyloid genes. But the fact is that most of the known genes we have for late onset Alzheimer's affect that inflammation, neuroinflammation. So your genetics will determine how fast you're going to have neuroinflammation, but your lifestyle will too. And I think the good news is that 98 to 99% of genetic susceptibility can be offset with lifestyle. That's why I talk about these books that I read about what you need to do. So I would say that if you have plaques and tangles already, whether it's by blood test or by PET scan, the brain is on its way to eventually to deterioration of Alzheimer's, except in very few cases of these resilient brains where somehow genetically they're protected against the inflammation and the wildfire. That's the sad truth.
And I have questions rolling in like crazy. So and several of them, so I'm going to try to combine some of them. But we have a bunch of quick questions on the blood tests. What Tricia wrote, what is the blood test called? And the one that Dr. Tanzi was referring to from the company C2N is called Procivity AD, and there are other ones. But I notice that there's somebody I'm seeing on the Zoom today who wrote to me after we did the first episode on blood tests because she tried to get a blood test. She just went to LabCorp or, to get a blood test. And she thought it would be reimbursed and she thought she could get her results. And not only was it not reimbursed, hi, Karen. Not only was it not reimbursed, but then she found out afterwards the doctor had to give her a note to say this was medically necessary. And as we know, even if she'd been able to get her results, she wouldn't have been able to interpret them. So this is, how do you get the blood test? Or eventually, is it ready now? How could you get it today? Can you try to give some answers for that? Because it's so exciting. There's blood tests. We can see how, we can see this, we can see that, we can see all these proteins. And the people who are suffering are really left behind a lot of times by the field.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the blood test can be prescribed by any doctor, but it's not covered by insurance because it's so-called not actionable. Meaning if you have a positive result, there's not a drug available right now that you can use to stop it. Well, the fact is there are these new immunotherapies, as like Leqembi and Kisunla, which will clear the amyloid once you find out you have it, but they were only approved for early stage Alzheimer's disease. So to get those drugs covered by insurance, you have to have plaque in your brain and you have to already have mild cognitive impairment, the earliest stage of Alzheimer's. But if you're a person with no cognitive issues, and you find out that you have a positive test for amyloid and tangles in your brain by blood test, because there's not other than lifestyle, there's not a drug. And I think lifestyle is a great actionable step. And so I would say do cover it because you'll do the lifestyle interventions more. And Dean Ornish and I just published a lifestyle intervention trial that had amazingly successful results. But that's not how health insurance companies see it. They want a little white pill you can take. I'm working on a little white pill. been working for 25 years on a drug called the gamma secretase modulator. It will help lower the production of amyloid. Remember, the new drugs that were approved clear the amyloid. I want to hit the production of amyloid safely, and it looks like our drug has a good chance of doing that. Right now, we're talking to the FDA about getting permission to do our phase 1 safety trial. It took 25 years to get here, but it's the last man standing in terms of a drug that will be like a statin for cholesterol to lower your cholesterol production. This will lower your amyloid production, unlike the drugs that exist now that let the amyloid be made and then try to clear it away. So eventually that test is going to be actionable. And I and many others are working on the drugs that will do that. I'm repurposing drugs. I'm starting trials at the McCann Center right now, a big fundraising campaign to start trials on repurposed drugs and natural products that are already on the shelf that can either stop amyloid production or the tangles or the inflammation. All of it's in process. But right now, because it's not actionable with a drug you can just get as a healthy person who found out they have biological Alzheimer's, they don't cover the test.
And so if you went to your doctor and you asked them to prescribe it, and you couldn't get coverage, is there a range of what it costs today, and will those costs come down?
Well, I think that last time I checked, and I know it changes, right? But I think the C2N passivity test last time I checked was about 1,500, 1515, which is not a small amount of money.
No.
So I think that once it's approved by insurance and everyone's going to get checked the same way they check their cholesterol, and there's, besides lifestyle, there are medications you can take to nip it in the bud, right? If this what we call secondary prevention. Okay, the plaques and tangles started, but let's wipe that amyloid out. Let's stop the amyloid from causing the tangles. Let's stop that process from causing the main problem, neuroinflammation, that causes most of the cell death. Then I think the price will come down because so many people will want to have it.
I think so too. So I'm just quickly going to answer a question that came in through YouTube from Stephen, who said, I mentioned that Mike Zendel got rid of his amyloid after 3 years. What did he do? He was in a trial for the first monoclonal antibody that Biogen tested called aducanumab, or Aduhelm, I guess was the name.
Aduhelm's the brand name. Aducanumab was a generic name.
Right. And so what he did basically was participate for 3 years in a trial with one of these drugs that are called a monoclonal antibody, like Kisunla and donanemab. And we have episodes on both of those drugs. So if you're interested, and he went from a pretty high amyloid burden in his brain down to a very small amount, and he feels great. Now, I'm not trying to endorse any drug or anything, but that's his experience. So there is the question, once we get a memory screening or we get a diagnosis, and I understand, by the way, also, I was just talking to another scientist that Dr. Tanzi knows, Mike Weiner, who's working on a cognitive assessment that could be done over the phone, just like a bot kind of thing, which would be wonderful and make it free and more accessible to everybody, and not just a little like preliminary screening, but an actual diagnosis. So he's just working on that now, but there's a lot happening. So, but when you get the diagnosis, what are the actionable items people can take right now? And what do you think it's going to be a year and 3 years from now?
Diagnosis of biological Alzheimer's or clinical Alzheimer's?
Oh, let's say both. And let's say, first of all, what can you give a brief introduction specifically, because these are terms the scientists use that the public mostly doesn't know. What is primary prevention versus secondary prevention?
So primary prevention would mean it's something you do to prevent the pathology itself from even occurring in the brain. Things you would do so that you don't have amyloid occur.
Never start.
You keep the brain clear of amyloid. You keep the brain clear of tangles. And you have to remember that Alzheimer's disease pathology is the most common age-related brain pathology. And if we all lived till 120, we would probably have plaques and tangles and neuroinflammation. And it's genetics and lifestyle that determines when you're going to get it. And I quote Randy Bateman when he said in a recent meeting we got together, the faster you make amyloid in your brain, the sooner you get Alzheimer's.
Mm.
But the amyloid can start forming 10, 20, 30 years before and start triggering the tangles. And then you have to have a buildup of that cell death. And then the inflammation is the big killer. That's the tangles and the plaques initiate. The inflammation is mainly executing the cell death. So so primary prevention means what can I do in my life or what even therapies can I take? I like to say early prediction, early detection, early intervention. Early prediction is I know my family history, or maybe I know my genetics. I carry two ApoE4 risk variants, so I have a familial early onset Alzheimer's gene that's very penetrant. Um, that will tell you when you need to start about early detection. But if your genetics are strong enough, you might want to start primary prevention because you know you're going to get there. So that's preventing the pathology at all. Secondary prevention is the pathology is there, but you don't have symptoms. You want to keep it that way. You want to stop bringing that amyloid down or the tangles down or the inflammation down so you don't get to the point of clinical symptoms. And right now, the only drugs we have to do that are only approved for early treatment, not for secondary prevention, because they're too expensive and they have safety issues that preclude them from being used just in some secondary prevention manner. We need safer, more affordable alternatives for that purpose, which I and many others are working on. And then finally, you have treatment. So you have now the clinical symptoms, but at this point, it's early stage treatment. So what can you do? I mean, you're talking about lifestyle, is that, or is
Well,
that the question?
I think lifestyle for sure, and you mentioned Shield briefly, and we just had Mia Kivipelto on the program in January. So for those of you who are interested in a deep dive into what you can do in your lifestyle preventions, you can see her episode as well as Dr. Tanzi's work. But I'm thinking about not only prevention or lifestyle interventions, but what if you wanted to participate in a trial that might reduce amyloid before you have symptoms? And I'm
Right.
looking for them because people had asked, and I'm not I'm not finding it on my sheet, but basically they say, I try to join a trial and then I'm told I can't participate because I have no symptoms. And then, so that's one thing I hear all the time. So if I want to know and I want to participate, I can't find a trial to participate in.
Well,
And you have
yeah,
to, that's my plea to you also to your trials coming up. If you could do them across the country and not only in Boston, that would be wonderful. And I know that
well,
takes funding, but I'm just putting in my plug anyway. And then after that question, the other question that I get all the time and is really bothering me, and I've been speaking to people, is what about for people who already have Alzheimer's and their loved one is in the moderate stage and is 78 or 83 and they can't participate in any trials either and they feel nothing's being done. If I already have Alzheimer's or I'm caring for my loved one, why is no one trying to develop
yeah,
things for them? And from the business perspective, I also think that's a huge marketplace of people, right, who
yeah,
have Alzheimer's symptoms already. And it's kind of being ignored as we make this big push to prevention, which of course I understand why, but I
right.
wonder if you can comment on all of that.
Well, that's a lot.
Yes, it is.
Uh,
Sorry.
but I guess I would start by saying, yes, the majority of trials have been on people with symptoms. And more recently, they focused on people with the earliest stage of the disease because that's where you have a chance to see an effect. That's how the immunotherapies were approved. These are very early stage patients, and you have to do a lot of them for a long time to get a result if you're hitting amyloid, because amyloid is something you want to prevent early on, and to treat it, you have to at least treat early as possible. We're seeing a push now toward trials that are looking at prevention. Risa Sperling at my institution at Mass General Brigham and Harvard is carrying out prevention trials. And I'm not sure about enrollment right now, but Risa Sperling is her name. And then at the McCants Center for Brain Health that I direct at Mass General, we're going to be doing trials where we don't care if you have symptoms. We're going to be doing trials to say, can we lower your brain pathology? That's all. We're going to track the blood biomarkers of brain pathology, plaques and tangles, using C2N blood tests. We're going to be using natural products. We're going to be using repurposed drugs. And we're going to just ask, can we see in a patient that we're in 6 months that we've lowered their pathology in the brain? We're not going to be looking at cognition. So we just want people who have the pathology. Biological Alzheimer's, meaning pathology, no symptoms, and clinical Alzheimer's, meaning you already have symptoms of cognitive impairment. Where I got these drugs and natural products from is 10 years ago, we invented Alzheimer's in a dish, as it's been trademarked. This is a mini human brain organoid made from human cells that are turned into various brain cells that we can grow in a matrix where what takes a decade or 2 or 3 in the brain for the pathology to lead to enough cell death to get cognitive impairment, we get that to happen in 6 weeks in a little mini human brain organoid in a dish. That's made screening for drugs and natural products that could stop the pathology 100 times faster and cheaper. So we tested every known approved drug that you could get at the drug, that you can get a prescription for. Over the counter, prescribed, we tested 3,500 natural products that are available in supplements. And we said, what works? And we came up with over 300 known drugs that are already approved and natural products that either stop the amyloid or stop the tangles or curb the neuroinflammation, or even do what the immunotherapies do, which is to get cells in the brain called microglia to eat the amyloid and clear it. That's how those immunotherapies work. So we're making combinations of these that are multifunctional, hit the plaques and the tangles and the inflammation with known safe drugs and natural products. And we want to do trials to simply ask, can we see in a person what we saw in the dish? In the dish, this combination lowered the tangles and stopped the inflammation. Okay, let's spend 6 months treating a person where we can look at blood biomarkers and say, did we have an effect? Did we lower the plaque and tangle in the brain? We're not trying to affect cognition, so we don't care if you have clinical symptoms yet. Just let's treat biological Alzheimer's disease that will help both people on their way and people who already have the disease. So that's what we're doing at the McCann Center right now. I raised enough funds to do the first combination. Each one of these little trials is about $2.5 million. But we want to do we have 25 different combinations that we're psyched about. So we're trying to raise like $50 to $75 million so we can do as many trials as we can. And I think then it will be actionable. If you have safe drugs and natural products that work, everyone gets the blood test, and you can afford to give everybody an actionable step. You can democratize early detection, early intervention. That's our goal.
Which is fantastic. And I'm going to leave aside what are we doing for patients who are more progressed for the moment, but because there's so much to get to. But and several people have asked in the chats about what are the supplements and treatment. And years and years ago, you told my husband and me that you really liked ashwagandha. And so I've been taking that for a long time, along with algal DHA. What therapeutic compounds are you most optimistic about? Clotho, rapamycin, intranasal insulin, something else, MABS, CT 1821, non-invasive brain stimulation. So there's a lot. There's
Okay.
there's a lot of research going on. The bad news is it's very confusing. What are the things you're most optimistic about?
Well, we don't have a treatment, right? I mean, the sad truth is we don't have something that can treat full-blown Alzheimer's right now. Even hitting the amyloid, you can slow cognitive impairment and decline with the 2 new immunotherapies, and it's only in early stage patients. And if you have full-blown Alzheimer's disease, you really have to stop neuroinflammation because the wildfire has started. And the fewest trials we have, the fewest drugs we have in the pipeline are for neuroinflammation. They got to catch up. My lab discovered the first neuroinflammation Alzheimer's gene in 2006, CD33, then TREM2 was found. Now we have like dozens of these genes that affect neuroinflammation. But there's a catch-up time, right? You have to go from the genes to the drugs. Remember, those first genes we found in the 80s and 90s were for amyloid. That's why there's more drugs for amyloid. But they don't work on people who have full-blown Alzheimer's. You have to use those either early stage and there's limited benefit or for prevention. Um, so among the therapies that are out there, I'm I'm excited about drugs that will stop amyloid production or clear amyloid in a safe and affordable way. I I don't think there's a lot out there right now in trials. I'm sorry to say that I'm excited about. I think that we got to do
Interesting.
better, honestly. I hate to be, negative, but I think that we're on a learning curve now where we really have to start thinking about my goal is to repurpose. I think take what's already on the shelf, learn what will work, and it's already safe, and stop making combinations of those and natural products as well. And there are supplements. I take a handful of supplements every morning, and
What do
I'm
you take?
careful about talking about them because,
Oh,
most of the supplements you buy on Amazon don't even have the stupid thing in it that they say is in it, right? It's an unregulated Wild West world where even if you're buying a supplement that has the right natural product in it, you don't even know if it's really in there or if it's clean or if it's contaminated. It's just unregulated. So I tell people, so what I've done is for the natural products we found that work in our dish, I've looked at supplements that contain them and make sure they're real. Look at the third-party testing, make sure they're clean. And then I do have a list that I send to family and friends or people who ask me um, with the links to supplements that I trust that contain the natural products that we found agnostically, just screening the dish, things we didn't even expect to find. And what I do is people email me because I send it with a 3-paragraph disclaimer. This is not clinical advice. We don't have clinical evidence yet. This is lab-based. I personally take them. For a lot of these natural products, we don't know the long-term effects. We don't know they're deemed to be safe, but who knows? So I want all that in a disclaimer before I send them out. That's why I just don't yap them out, but I'm happy if people want to email me for that list. I do it all the time. Then they get the disclaimer, they get the links to the right supplements that I trust. And if I just give a name and you go online and buy a supplement that purports to contain it, you don't know what you're going to get. So this is a better way to do it. I'm happy to do that.
that makes a lot of sense. And maybe, is it okay if we put your email in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
chat? Okay, great.
yeah.
And I want to ask, and I know Jamie, hi, Jamie. It's good to see you, has been asking a lot of questions. What's your feelings about the promise of these GLP-1 drugs potentially being useful in Alzheimer's? Do we know?
We don't know yet. I mean, some of the early looks, you're not seeing anything on symptoms yet, or um, it looks like some of the thinning of the brain where neurons get lost was ameliorated a bit by one of the GLP-1s. But I think the jury's still out. I think we need to see
We have to do
the
more testing.
trials and see what happens. So, but it's
And
still early days.
And Jamie also asked, when you're ApoE4 positive, and there are a lot of questions, so we have 30 or 40 questions in the chat, about ApoE4 status. And I had written in my original set of questions, if you're ApoE4 positive, does your protocol change, like your lifestyle interventions or
Oh,
your,
no.
but
It-
she's
it-
asking, what does it mean when you have a C2N result that comes back as in the gray zone and you're ApoE4 positive?
Yeah, so that means that you need to do things more diligently and vigilantly than the average person when it comes to lifestyle right now. Or I'm not claiming my supplements that I take are going to clinically work. That's why I'm trying to do the trials on them now, right? So I'm trying to raise funds to do the trials so I can speak with more, authority about the clinical evidence. But I would say that whether you're in the gray zone or not, ApoE4 is a risk factor and you got to do more. And I think lifestyle can go a real long way. And, when we did this Dean Ornish did a lifestyle intervention trial where the results blew my mind. And Dean's running with it. Dean's starting a protocol now based on it. I think I'd like to see another trial that's bigger, but it was only 50 people,
Mhm.
25 on a lifestyle intervention, 25 not, only in 20 weeks. And it was based on his book, and the diets in his book that are similar to the plant-based diets, recipes. And it was based on Shield as well. Shield, that we didn't talk about yet, is, sleep, because it's during 7 to 8 hours. Even a power nap is fine. Every time you go through a cycle of dreaming to deep sleep, you help rinse away amyloid in the brain. You turn on the lymphatic system that cleans up amyloid in the brain. So you want to have as many of these cycles of dreaming to deep sleep as you can. And sometimes a good power nap will get you one of those cycles. I like to think like a rinse cycle for the brain. And sleep, when you dream, it also helps consolidate memory, because dreams are like little movies based on real events, but they help consolidate memory. So you first you dream, and then you clear away the amyloid and debris. So H is handling stress. Stress is a killer. It causes inflammation. So that means, finding ways to be more mindful in the moment, more relaxed, more calm. Don't let social media freak you out. Don't let people you don't like freak you out. Just try to be more mindful. And I is interaction. So interaction with others, right? Loneliness is a risk factor for Alzheimer's. So a lot of people, their hearing starts to go. And then that leads to less interaction with others because they don't even realize it, but they're not part of the conversation because they can't hear. So check your hearing, make sure that you can stay in the conversation, interaction with others. I like to say, but if you're interacting with others who stress you out, that's not good. Get rid of them. And then E is exercise. So we showed years ago that exercise induces the birth of new neurons in the brain, neurogenesis, and a growth factor called BDNF that keeps those new neurons alive. And I think giving Alzheimer's mice a running wheel worked as well as any drug so far. And we could actually video which mice use the running wheel all night. And believe me, you can never exercise this much. These mice go crazy on the running wheel. But other mice don't use it, and they just watch. They're like, hey, look at Joe go, and and the mice, so you can know who exercised and who didn't. Then you can see the ones that exercised, new neurons were born, and they also clear amyloid in the brain, because we found out that there's a hormone made by muscle, a myokine called irisin, when you exercise, that goes into the blood, gets into the brain, binds a cell called the astrocyte, and it induces that cell to release an enzyme that breaks down the amyloid. So when you exercise, you're actually enzymatically breaking down amyloid with the help of your muscle myokine called irisin. So L is learn new things, right? So the bottom line is cognitive decline is loss of synapses. 100 billion neurons, trillions of synapses or connections. When you learn new things, you make new synapses, and they connect with old synapses, and you strengthen your neural network. So synaptic reserve is like money in the bank. The more synapses you make, the more you can lose over your life before you run out, just like having money in the bank. So you have to learn new things. So I like to say, if you're learning something new right now, I'm helping you to avoid Alzheimer's. But if I'm putting you to sleep, I'm still helping you either way. So, and then D is diet. And you heard from Mia. So diet in the trial we did with Dean, we used a plant-based diet, strictly vegan diet. Now, a lot of people can't be vegan. I'm vegetarian, but a lot of people have trouble vegan. So I say treat a vegan diet like medicine. As often as you can have plant-based diet, it's like taking a drug, right? Every time you make those gut microbiome bacteria happy, and they love crunchy things that are not potato chips. They like fiber from veggies, fruits, seeds, nuts, whole grains. And in this trial with Dean, where the main thing was diet, Dean actually had the vegan meals, 21 meals and snacks delivered to the patient and their spouse every week. So that was the most compliant part of this intervention. We monitored sleep, exercise. Yes, they interacted on Zoom. They were learning new things with lectures, et cetera. But diet was the main thing. And in this trial, using the same stringent cognitive tests that we use for the immunotherapies, right? The toughest cognitive test to hit that failed again and again across different drug trials. These patients actually the trial was actually more successful than the immunotherapies. They went in the immunotherapies, they declined 25%, more slowly. In this trial, they declined, I don't know what the exact percent of it, but it almost flatlined the decline. Just, it was like they went from a black slope to a green bunny slope skiing. And on one of the tests called CDR Global, this was amazing, they got better. So again, it's a small trial, but it says it gave me so much hope that lifestyle matters so much more than we think. And that if that blood test was covered by insurance, the actionable step is lifestyle and Shield. And I think it would make a difference. And if you find out you're starting to make amyloid, or if you're already ApoE4 positive, you got to ramp Shield up. It now becomes an obligation. This is what you got to do to keep your brain healthy. So
And
that's the new
ultimately,
book I'm writing, by the way. I'm not trying to sell the book. It's not going to be for a while. But I invented this acronym Shield about 7, 8 years ago, and now it's gotten so viral that after not writing a book in years, my book agent said, you got to write Shield. So I finally decided to do it.
and you were talking about stress, and I know you wrote a book with Deepak Chopra, who also talks a lot about how important stress
Yeah.
reduction is.
Yeah, we wrote 3 books. We wrote a trilogy together. The
And
Healing Self, the last one called The Healing Self, was the one that gave rise to Shield. I didn't have Shield in the book, but there's an action plan, lifestyle action plan at the end that after the book was published, I had to summarize it. I came up with Shield, and it's it's twofold. Shield is meant to help reduce amyloid that triggers the disease, but it's also meant to reduce inflammation, which is the executor, the killer of neurons. It's meant to do both.
and when we say exercise, what's the right dose exercise?
It's all about blood flow, right? So when your blood is flowing faster, your heart's beating faster. This is what gets the muscles to release this irisin that goes to the brain and causes enzymatic degradation of amyloid. Same thing with the neurogenesis. It's blood flow that brings factors from the liver and other organs into the brain that induces neurogenesis. So you don't have to go crazy. If you can just get your heart rate up even 50% for 20 minutes a day, like take a brisk walk, right? I have a bike. I have a bike back there, and I jump on the bike for 20 minutes, and I do like 80 RPM, just get my my heart rate up at least 50%. And that blood flow is enough to achieve these goals of enzymatically breaking down amyloid with the help of muscle myokine, and helping with neurogenesis, because you're getting the blood to deliver more to the brain that induces neurogenesis. It's that simple.
And if you're exercise restricted or mostly bedridden, somebody's just written in, is there anything that you can do in terms of
Yeah,
exercise, or it depends, you need more information?
yeah. Some people were thinking about like meds that would safely increase heart rate, but I don't know if that's safe. And I'm not a clinician, so I don't, yeah.
Okay.
I think there are other things, if you're bedridden, there are other things you can do. Diet, look, and when I go through Shield, and people say, what's the most important letter? Diet. Absolutely diet. I used to sleep and exercise closely follow.
Right.
But man, when I see what we were able to do with Alzheimer's mice, we were able to get the amyloid cleared, the inflammation down with just a diet that was high in fiber, prebiotics, as they're called. So people take probiotics. Yeah, you're adding 10 or 11 bacteria to 8,000 strains and trillions of bacteria already in your gut. But when you have fiber, plant-based diet, right? Even just, every single day, try to eat veggies, fruits, nuts and seeds, which I love, whole grains. All your trillions of bacteria in your gut will be happy and balanced. And somehow, I don't know how, that leads to the clearance of amyloid in your brain. We see it in mice. We've published 4 or 5 studies that show that. So we always say what's good for the heart is good for the brain. Equally true, what's good for the gut is good for the brain. It's equally true now. So
Yeah, and
diet's number one.
I actually wanted to ask you about the relationship of the gut microbiome to brain health, because there's been a lot about that. And you even wrote something about dental
Mm.
hygiene. But give us a little primer on the gut the gut microbiome. And then for people like myself who have Crohn's disease and can't eat a lot of green leafy vegetables, you know, I guess we go to the nuts and the seeds and the grains part.
Yeah, right. I get most of my fiber. I get a lot of fiber from nuts and seeds, and get the low salt ones, so you don't get overblown with salt. Um, you know, um, so your gut microbiome produces different what we call short chain fatty acids and like butyrate, et cetera. And these get into the brain through the gut-brain axis. And they seem to stimulate microglial cells to eat amyloid. The same cell that eats the amyloid, the microglia, is the one that, when it's overwhelmed, causes inflammation. So the microglia can be, you want them to be your best friends and not be your enemies. And somehow a healthy gut microbiome and the short chain fatty acids that go to the brain, when you have a balanced microbiome, really program these microglial cells to do the right thing and not do the wrong thing. That's the easiest way to put it. So I actually started a company with Gary Ruvkin. Gary Ruvkin won the Nobel Prize last year for his work on microRNAs. And he and I started a company called Marvel Biome, where we actually isolated thousands of bacteria from the gut, I think 5,000 or 6,000. And then we test each bacteria individually to see which one can help prevent Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative disease. And then we made a mix of about 10 of those. And none of these are going to be in your yogurt or your probiotic. These are really arcane bacteria because we just screened to see which ones work. And now we have a collection of 10 of those that we're using in an Alzheimer's trial and then a trial on ALS. So I like to say using bugs as drugs. So that's the more extreme version of the gut microbiome. But just having a diet that keeps your gut microbiome happy and avoiding ultra-processed foods, high fat, high salt, high sugar, those really, that skews the bacteria ratios in your microbiome to be bad for the brain. So there's this ratio in the gut called firmicutes and bacteroides. And that ratio becomes abnormal in Alzheimer's, and a healthy diet corrects it. We actually had Rob Knight do the microbiome work on the Dean Ornish trial, and we could see that we corrected the ratio in the right direction. I mean, I think that had a big part for why these patients did better with that lifestyle intervention. So I do sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, different types of tree nuts, low salt every single day as just a quick fix, just to keep my gut microbiome happy, because I don't always eat enough fruits and veggies. I should, but I don't.
We're comforted by the fact that that you're imperfect as we are. You mentioned having them with less salt. And somebody had written in a question about foods to avoid. So, what are the top things to avoid as we add in the seeds and the nuts and the fiber?
Well, junk food, ultra processed food, right? Like
So that
cheese in
really
a
affects
can,
your brain, not just your weight, but it really affects your brain.
Yeah, I mean, Cola showed that salt can directly affect tangle formation in the brain. So foods that disrupt the gut microbiome are ones that are very high in salt, fat, and sugar, because it causes certain bacteria to grow well and other ones to suffer because it's a colony. And if one set of bacteria becomes opportunistic and grows more, it's going to hurt the other bacteria. So you want balance. And it's the democratic principle for bacteria is when they have lots of prebiotics, which is fiber, plant-based fiber. So even if you're not vegan or vegetarian, just insisting every day that I feed my gut bacteria. Think of them like a fish tank, right? And you got to feed them every day and say, oh, my gut bacteria, I didn't take care of them today. Go eat some pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds or whatever every single day.
I was going to mention along with this that we had Laura Baker on as well. And Laura was doing a study, I guess it was a very large study, as I recall, over 5,000 people and they were really trying to prove out the benefits of cocoa or cacao. But they also tested it with a supplement. It was actually Centrum Silver. And she said on the program that the cacao had no effect whatsoever, but that the Centrum Silver actually seemed to be rather
Yeah,
beneficial.
probably
So,
because of the B vitamins. You know,
okay,
I take Centrum Silver myself,
I do too.
yeah. So the director of our clinical trials at the McCann Center, Gene Bowman, when he was at Nestle, they came up with what's called a nutritional risk index, where you can look at certain components in your blood that are indicative of your nutritional health status. And they found that B vitamins like B12 and folate, D3, and omega-3 fatty acids like DHA and EPA. If you take just those three, you can make a score. So if you're low in one of those, you get a score of 1, low in two, low in all three. And what we're finding is that nutritional risk index correlates with risk for Alzheimer's and Alzheimer biomarkers. And we're waiting to hear about a large NIH grant that will actually directly benchmark the nutritional risk index against the blood-based biomarkers of Alzheimer's pathology. And this is particularly true for ApoE4, right? So so supplementing D3, B vitamins, which could be just a supplement, Centrum, but also adding in omega-3 fatty acids. So that could be from fish oil. But as a vegetarian, I get it from algae. I take a vegetarian-based DHA EPA. And with fish oil, I'll say this: if you're not paying a lot for your fish oil, be careful, because fish oil it's cheap, like in big tub full of fish oil is going to be full of mercury, cadmium, cesium, because our oceans are filthy, and fatty fish accumulate heavy metals. So if they're not doubly or triply distilling the fish oil, you could be doing more harm than good, because you're going to be getting mercury poisoning, and that's very bad for the brain. So if you're going to do fish oil, make sure it's a very high-end fish oil that's at least doubly distilled to get rid of those metals.
And you're suggesting, is the algal or the oil from algae less likely to have those contaminants?
Yeah, it doesn't have metals in it. Yeah. Not to push a brand, but I know Nordic Naturals is supposed to be very clean. And so, the algal one I use is from Spectrum, but I'm not pushing that because I'm not involved with those companies, but that's what I
What was
use.
the one you said, Nordic Naturals? Because
Nordic Naturals for the fish oil, and then for the algae, I think Nordic Naturals makes a vegetarian one, but I've been using Spectrum for a long time.
this is fantastic information, and we have only 4 minutes left. And so first, I want to, in front of all these people, extract a promise from you to come back, because there's so much we haven't
Sure.
covered.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I do want to devote a couple of minutes to a second question from Mike Zundell, who I opened the episode with. And we talked about stigma and getting an Alzheimer's diagnosis.
Mhm.
He is on a crusade to try to change the use of the word dementia as related to cognitive impairment and cognitive decline. And when I first heard about this, I said, this is just an uphill battle. Everyone, in fact, the term dementia is searched on the internet more than the term Alzheimer's, but both Alzheimer's and dementia have terrible connotations, especially demented, and I thought at first this is a very difficult task to do, but he went back into history, and I saw how he changed the use of many other terms that were considered medical terms, like idiot and retarded, and these words that got officially changed. Do you feel it's important to change the lexicon at this time? Is it? I mean, you're a
I
scientist.
do.
That's not your thing, but
No, I do feel it. I do feel. I think that dementia is a general term for catastrophic cognitive decline, but unfortunately, we don't diagnose diseases of dementia, most common being Alzheimer's, until there's already early stage dementia. So the way forward is going to be to do for Alzheimer's, to do for diseases from the neck up what we do from the neck down. Early detection, early intervention, not wait until you have symptoms We don't wait till you have symptoms of diabetes or heart disease, or we don't wait for a tumor to get, big enough that you have symptoms from organ failure. We treat everything early from the neck down. It's tougher from the neck up, but because there's stigma, because if you get diagnosed with a blood test that says you have Alzheimer's pathology, which a lot of people will have. In fact, in this country, the high-end estimate for how many people have amyloid, if you had a blood test, which sees it before the PET scan, the blood test will detect the tangles and plaques before the blood scan, before the PET scan. And if you ask how many, the low estimate is 10 million. The higher estimate is 50 million, 50. So you got to give these people a fighting chance. Let them find out and make it actionable. And that means that you need to know, whether you're going to do shield more and lifestyle. You need to know if you have biological Alzheimer's, meaning Alzheimer's pathology. I don't want to call it biological Alzheimer's. I don't want to call it Alzheimer's. I think we have to come up with a whole new lexicon, different names. And I agree, get away from dementia that just shows this age-related spectrum that can take decades from the pathology that's going to accumulate in most of us, just a matter of when, not whether. And for some, you might avoid it until you die of other causes. That's about half the population, right? But know you're on your way and be able to speak about it openly without stigma and take care of it. There was a time when when I was growing up, cancer was the C word, right? Heart disease. Alzheimer's is the A word. Like, let's just deal with it, because the only way we're going to beat this disease is early prediction based on genetics and family history. That will guide when you do early detection. And you want to know decades before you're going to have symptoms that you need to intervene and nip it in the bud. That's early intervention. That's how we're going to stop it.
Thank you. That was a great wrap up. But I'd like to ask everybody who's still on, if you don't mind, to weigh in on this question. Do you feel it's important to change the terminology, in particular the word dementia? And just if you do feel it's important, to put a yes into the chat box, because I'm fascinated with how much this means to this person, and I think a lot of other people as well, and also how it ultimately gets into the scientific lexicon as the researchers are working, and what kind of a paradigm shift we might be able to affect if there were changes in these words. And I don't know what those words would be, and I know that everybody's struggling with that, but cognitive, yes, and to stop politicizing it, I agree. So please keep writing your messages in the chat. But Dr. Tanzi, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I know everybody deeply appreciated it. And to everybody on, you will get a transcript of this. You will get a recording of it. And we will try to have Dr. Tanzi back, because there's so much more to cover. So if you would like, in addition to the resources that we're going to send, and I should mention also, Dr. Tanzi, you were on the scientific review committee for Bright Focus Foundation. I know some of the stuff you talked about today was funded by, the work was funded by Bright Focus Foundation. So thank you for all the work you've done with us. You can ask for free publications here at brightfocus.org, info@brightfocus.org. And the next slide, please. If you have particular topics that we haven't covered yet, please email them to reply@brightfocus.org. And the last slide. We've also started, as I think most of you know, a sub-series on clinical research. And Dr. Tanzi, this may be of interest to you. I try to do, multi-site trials, but we are hosting every other month an additional episode where we pick one clinical trial and we just talk in detail about that trial. And we've done the HOPE study and the START study, and we're going to continue to try to promote different studies for different kinds of therapeutics and interventions. So the next one of those is April 3rd, and the next one of these is March 20th, and we hope you will all join us. And again, we could do a silent applause for Dr. Tanzi. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody has a great month. And thank you for joining us. Take care.
Thank you all for that. I wish I could answer every question in the chat. Maybe there's a chance later on to with Sharon to tackle more of those.
And I think you're going to get about a couple hundred emails, Dr.
Yeah,
Tanzi.
well, I have the PDF is ready. And,
Right.
it's just, the disclaimer is important, because, there's too much snake oil out there, and
Yep.
people pushing brain snake oil. I can't mention names because some of these companies make so much money, they'll sue you as soon as you say they're snake oil. But most everything out there is bunk. And so you gotta be really careful. So that's why I like to do it with a real letter and disclaimer, and then say, here's what we found lab-based. And then if I can raise enough money, we're gonna do the clinical trials, and then we'll have the clinical evidence, hopefully.
By the way, I agree with you. You know, I see television commercials for products that have absolutely no evidence to support them. And my
Zero
mom,
biological basis, never mind
zero
evidence.
biological basis. My mom is 95 and has mild cognitive impairment. And I know my sister she lives with my sister. My sister tells me she's on the website ordering things online. It's not right. So thank you for putting together that sheet. That's incredibly important. And
My
thank
pleasure.
you all again.
Welcome.
Have a great day, and it's great to see everybody.
Okay, thanks.
Take care.